which is the case across the world, I'm sure. But there's nothing been raised by any of the present candidates, and probably one we could talk much about is Ron Paul, because Ron Paul has been falsely or erroneously presumed to intend to end the Federal Reserve System. And it's as if his supporters just believe that somehow, quote, ending, unquote, the Fed would resolve our problems. And they think this without respect to a fact that Ron Paul even so much as boasts, and Ron is, seemingly humble demeanor, which is a quality I do appreciate about him. But he as much as boasts as being an Austrian economist, so-called, and I say boast, I should qualify this. What I mean by that is that he's never justified that it's anything to mention with any kind of pride or that it deserves any esteem whatsoever, because, after all, what problems does it solve? When we even make a cursory investigation into so-called Austrian economics, what do we find? We find immediately that it's prevailed over by preposterous pretended authorities who, such as Frederick Hayek, for instance, who in 1975 is advocating that we'll only have honest money again, which is the same thing that Ron Paul is crying for, of course, when the power of creating money is returned to private banks, not to the people somehow, but to private banks. And you will not find in the entire preposterous pseudoscience of Austrian economics why the power should exist in private banks versus the people, which is where I advocate that it should be. And must be, because the people become automatically the regulators of the circulation according to need under mathematically perfected economy. Government really doesn't even play a role in it. We centralize what I've called the common monetary foundry simply to result in a uniformity of circumstances which we agree upon for issuing money that is subject to certification of creditworthiness and determination of a proprietary determinate lifespan and of determination of a appropriate rate of depreciation which reflects consumption of the related property. So these are things that we agree upon, but through the principles of mathematically perfected economy, we get a perfected economy without even any regulation, simply by applying those rules as needed, certifying creditworthiness, allowing every individual to represent or monetize, in other words, our production by a commitment to pay for the production as they consume of it. That's it. It's not even really truly a debt. It's a commitment merely to pay for what we consume as we consume of it. And of course, as I've said often, promissory obligations are the only plausible vehicle for a true economy, therefore, because all circulation has to be retired from circulation as the related value of the property is consumed, which is why promissory obligations are the only vehicle by which to accomplish the objects of an actual, genuine economy. But Ron Paul, as an Austrian economist, is an advocate of banking. As I was mentioning, Friedrich Hayek claims that we'll only have honest money when the power of creating money is returned to private banks as opposed to the government. He said this in 1975, and it's posted on the von Mises pages to this very day in an article which is entitled "A Free Market Monetary System." In fact, let's see, the URL for this article is Mises.org, Mises.org/daily/3204. Read this. It's a lecture delivered at the Gold and Monetary Conference in New Orleans on November 10th, 1977, actually. I said 75. So here is Hayek in 77, and it's proudly displayed on the Ludwig von Mises Institute web pages. As an Austrian economist, he's saying the only, of course, entirely without qualification, there isn't a fundamental principle cited by which the objects are ostensibly serve the people or are even accomplished by the intended means. And he's saying we'll only have honest money. These are just dogma, just catchwords, just slogans. We'll only have honest money when the power of creating money is returned to private banks from the federal government. He said this in 1977 under a Federal Reserve System, which is those private banks. The money is introduced by private banks, and he's blaming all its faults on federal government, which doesn't issue the money. Private banks issued the money, which he's criticizing. And he's saying by returning it to private banks where it already was, which is why we suffer all the faults, that we would have what Ron Paul calls also honest money. So that's how preposterous the pretended authority of Austrian economists is. They're claiming the opposite of what's true is responsible for will accomplish the opposite of what it accomplishes, citing the opposite of the data as if that is the data. I mean, you couldn't be more confused than this. And I mean, how the Ludwig von Mises Institute could continue to display this article, which I've, taken pictures of for years, preserved, it as it existed on these pages, because it ought to be among any sufficiently intellectual people who are capable of understanding the causes of their problems. This ought to be an incredible embarrassment, you see, especially since Friedrich Hayek is a demigod of the purported discipline of Austrian economics. So I've called a number of the presidential candidates here for this present campaign this week, and it's been I've been intending to do this for weeks, but an interesting thing has evolved, and that is that even after weeks after these people announce their candidacy, there isn't even a telephone number where you can talk to a person. Now, I've sent emails, countless emails, even to Ron Paul himself, just to Ron Paul. I've sent, innumerable. I have no idea how many times I've written Ron Paul, the Ron Paul campaign. You may recall a detailed story I provided of interaction between myself and the 2008 Ron Paul campaign, where a telephone receptionist named Andrew, immediately upon introducing myself, asserts that everyone knows there's no such thing as mathematically perfected economy. And of course, I immediately responded to Andrew's mere assertion with a rhetorical question. I said, Do you mean to tell me that if inflation and deflation are defined respectively as either increases or decreases in circulation for represented wealth or represented property, that there's no solution to inflation and deflation? And this question is one which, I've actually been in teaching situations with young children and have succeeded in them understanding on their own in such ways that they would invalidate a false proposition that I would raise, hoping to inspire them to come up with the answer. Which answer, of course, is that if something increases in proportion to another thing or decreases in proportion to that other thing, how do we solve either an increase or decrease? Well, the answer is simple. There's only one other possibility, and it's the one thing that we have to ask about in any kind of mathematic analysis, because the only thing that is neither is an increase or a decrease is equality. So we would have to ask about equality, and certainly, as soon as we ask this question, it's a matter of second grade math to understand, with the maturity that we should expect of the usual 7-year-old, to answer that, well, if something increases or decreases, and either increases or decreases in are bad, then the only thing that solves the issue is equality. So, in order to solve inflation and deflation, would they be eradicated if we maintained a circulation which was at all times equal to the remaining value of represented property? And the answer, of course, is absolutely. In fact, that's the only solution. So it's not that this is difficult. And of course, Ron Paul's answering person, Andrew, only replied after substantial pause, well, I can't debate that with you, sir. What's the debate? It's second grade math. There's one answer, and it's readily understood. So this is how preposterous Austrian economists are. So in the calls I made this week, what happened is I looked at pages for these various candidates, and I see that finally telephone numbers have surfaced for a few of the candidates. So the first candidate that I called was Michelle Bachman.
Bachman for president. This is Jesse. How can I help you?
Hey, Jesse. My name is Mike Montagne, and I'd like to first advise you that this telephone call is being recorded. I'm attempting to contact Michelle with a special offer. I'm founder of People for Mathematically Perfected Economy and host of international talk show radio program Mike Montagne on Mathematically Perfected Economy and Absolute Consensual Representation. So what I'm calling about is I'd like to, number one, offer Michelle a platform of Mathematically Perfected Economy as her monetary platform. And furthermore, like to interview her or debate monetary solution with her, whichever may be the case, at some time.
Okay. All right. What I'm gonna do is take your information. I'm gonna forward that to our media staff.
All right.
And they will contact you. So could I get your first and last name?
My first name, Jesse, is Mike. And the last name is Montagne, and I'll spell that out for you. It's Montagne.
T-A-G what?
T-A-G-N-E. N as in no, E as in elephant.
Okay. All right. And can I get your phone number?
Yes, I'll give you my home
email.
home number.
Okay.
Well, it's much. I get 1,000 emails a day past spam filters, so it's tough for me to sometimes look for
Okay.
special email. Best to
Okay.
call. My home number is, and so I give a private telephone number here. I have